On Father's Day, my son slammed the table and shouted, "You useless old man. Start paying the bills or go to a nursing home." That night, I packed my bags and decided to leave a letter on the table. The next day, he froze at the truth about the inheritance. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alan, and I'm 59 years old. I never thought I'd spend Father's Day being told by my own son that I was worthless." The morning started like any other Sunday. I woke up in the small bedroom Patrick had relegated me to when I moved in with him and his wife Sarah 3 years ago. It used to be their home office, but they cleared it out for me after I told them I was struggling financially. At least, that's what I let them believe. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Sarah was complaining about something, as usual. Her voice had this sharp edge that could cut glass, especially when she was talking about money. Patrick's responses were muffled, but I caught enough words to know they were discussing me again. "Your father needs to start contributing more," Sarah was saying. "It's been 3 years, Patrick. 3 years of free meals, free housing, free everything. My friends are starting to ask questions." I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, listening to my daughter-in-law reduce my existence to a financial burden. The irony wasn't lost on me. If only she knew the truth. I shuffled to the bathroom, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Gray hair that needed cutting, clothes that had seen better days, the general appearance of a man who'd given up. It was all carefully crafted, of course, every detail designed to maintain the illusion I'd built over the years. When I made it to the kitchen, Sarah barely looked up from her phone. Patrick was reading the newspaper, his jaw set in that familiar way that meant he was building up to something. The Father's Day card I'd received sat unopened on the counter. It was one of those generic drugstore cards, the kind you grab when you remember at the last minute. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice quiet. "Dad, we need to talk," Patrick said without looking up from his paper. Sarah finally glanced at me, her expression cold. She was a pretty woman, I'll give her that. But her beauty was the kind that came with a price tag. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her highlighted hair to her designer workout clothes. She'd married Patrick when his construction business was doing well, back when they thought I was just a retired factory worker with a modest pension. "Sit down, Alan," Sarah said, using my first name instead of calling me Dad like she had in the early days. That small change had happened gradually, and it stung more than I cared to admit. I poured myself coffee from the pot they'd already half-emptied and sat at the small breakfast table. Patrick folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, the way he did everything when he was preparing for confrontation. "Look, Dad," he began, and I could already hear the rehearsed quality in his voice. Sarah had coached him through this conversation. "We've been talking, and we think it's time you started contributing more to the household expenses." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. This wasn't the first time they'd brought up money, but there was something different in Patrick's tone today, something harder. "I mean, you're living here rent-free," Sarah chimed in. "Eating our food, using our utilities. Patrick works 60-hour weeks just to keep this place running, and you're not even trying to help." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Not trying to help. If only they knew how much I'd helped over the years, how much I'd sacrificed to make sure Patrick had every opportunity in life. "I'm doing what I can," I said quietly. "The pension doesn't stretch very far." Patrick's face flushed red. "That's exactly the problem, Dad. You're not doing what you can. You're doing the bare minimum. You sit around here all day, watching TV, acting like some kind of invalid." "Patrick," I started, but he cut me off. "No, let me finish." His voice was rising now, and I could see our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, working in her garden through the kitchen window. She'd definitely hear this. "I'm tired of making excuses for you. Sarah's tired of it too. Her parents think I'm some kind of fool for supporting a grown man who won't even try to find work." The words stung because I could hear Sarah's influence in every syllable. This wasn't really Patrick talking. This was Sarah's frustration being channeled through my son's mouth. "I'm 59 years old," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's going to hire me?" "Plenty of places," Sarah snapped. "Walmart, Home Depot, grocery stores. You're not disabled, Alan. You're just lazy." Lazy. The word hung in the air like a curse. I thought about all the years I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for Patrick's college education, all the overtime shifts I'd pulled to make sure he had everything he needed. I thought about the sacrifices his mother and I had made before she passed, how we'd lived in a tiny apartment so we could save money for his future. "Maybe you should consider assisted living," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "There are some nice places that accept Medicare. You'd have your own space, activities with people your own age." "You want to put me in a nursing home?" The words came out as a whisper. "It's not a nursing home," Patrick said quickly, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. "It's just, maybe it would be better for everyone." Everyone, meaning them. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking slightly, not from age or infirmity, but from pure rage. The carefully constructed facade I'd maintained for 3 years was starting to crack. "Better for everyone," I repeated. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be," Patrick said. "We're not throwing you out on the street. We're just saying you need to start taking responsibility for your own life." That's when something inside me snapped. I looked at my son, really looked at him. This man I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose homework I'd helped with, whose college tuition I'd paid in full. This man who was now looking at me like I was a piece of furniture he wanted to get rid of. "Responsibility," I said, and I could hear my voice getting stronger. "You want to talk about responsibility?" "Alan," Sarah warned, sensing the shift in my tone. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. "I took responsibility when your mother got sick," I said, my eyes locked on Patrick's. "I took responsibility when we had to choose between buying you new clothes for school or paying for her medication. I took responsibility when I worked double shifts for 6 years straight to make sure you could go to college debt-free." Patrick's face was getting redder. "That's ancient history, Dad. What have you done lately?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What had I done lately? Only maintained an elaborate deception to protect him from the truth about our family's real financial situation. Only lived like a pauper so he could learn the value of hard work and humility before discovering his inheritance. "You ungrateful little—" I started, but Patrick slammed his fist on the table so hard the coffee cups jumped. "Enough," he shouted. "I'm sick of hearing about all the things you did 20 years ago. This is now, Dad. Right now. And right now, you're nothing but a burden." The word echoed in the suddenly silent kitchen. Burden. Sarah was staring at us both, her eyes wide. She'd gotten the confrontation she wanted, but maybe not quite the way she'd expected. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Patrick's face, and something died inside me. Not love. You can't kill a parent's love that easily, but hope. Hope that he might still be the good man I'd tried to raise. "You want me to contribute?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Patrick said, still breathing hard from his outburst. "Fine," I said. "I'll start contributing. But first, I think you need to understand exactly what kind of man you're throwing away." I turned and walked toward my room, leaving them sitting there in confused silence. Behind me, I could hear Sarah asking Patrick what I meant, but he had no answer. He would, though, soon enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Patrick and Sarah talking in low voices, probably planning their next move and getting rid of the burden I'd apparently become. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I got up around midnight and walked to the window. The neighborhood was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows across the well-maintained lawns. This was a good neighborhood, the kind of place where people took pride in their homes and their lives. Patrick had done well for himself, I had to admit that. His construction business was successful. Sarah drove a nice car. They took vacations twice a year. They had no idea that none of it would have been possible without the foundation I'd laid for Patrick years ago. I thought about calling my lawyer, Marcus Webb. He'd been handling my affairs for 15 years. Ever since I'd made the decision to live simply and invest quietly. Marcus was one of the few people who knew the truth about my financial situation. He'd questioned my choices over the years, especially my decision to let Patrick believe I was just scraping by on a factory pension. "You're going to regret this," Marcus had warned me 3 years ago when I'd told him about moving in with Patrick. Living a lie never ends well, Alan. But I'd been stubborn. I'd convinced myself that I was teaching Patrick valuable lessons about family loyalty, about taking care of your elders regardless of their financial status. I'd believed that when the time was right, when Patrick had proven himself to be a man of character, I'd reveal the truth about our family's wealth. Sitting there in the dark, I realized how naive I'd been. Patrick had shown me his true character tonight, and it wasn't pretty. I walked quietly to my small closet and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were documents that Sarah and Patrick had never seen, would never have thought to look for. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. The real Alan Morrison, not the broken-down old man I'd been pretending to be. The numbers were staggering, even to me sometimes. Over the years, through careful investing and some lucky real estate purchases, I'd accumulated wealth that most people could only dream of. Not billionaire money, but enough to live very comfortably for several lifetimes. All of it earmarked for Patrick in my will. All of it about to change. I sat at the small desk in my room and pulled out a piece of paper. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. The hurt from earlier had crystallized into something else. Not anger, exactly. More like disappointment so deep it felt like grief. Patrick, I wrote, then stopped. How do you tell your son that everything he thinks he knows about his father is wrong? How do you explain that you've been testing him for years, and he's failed? I started over. Son, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, just gone from your life in the way you clearly want me to be. I won't be a burden to you anymore. There are things about me you don't know, things I've kept hidden, because I wanted you to learn certain lessons about character and family before you discovered the truth. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. I suppose I got my answer tonight. The pension you think I live on barely covers my basic needs. You're right about that. What you don't know is that I don't need it to. I've been living beneath my means by choice, not necessity. Your mother and I made certain decisions after you graduated college. We invested the money from the sale of her parents' farm, the insurance money from the accident, the savings we'd accumulated over 25 years of marriage. We were very careful, very smart about it. That little apartment I lived in before moving here, I own the entire building, the old Ford I drive. I have a newer Mercedes sitting in a storage unit across town. The simple clothes, the careful spending, the constant worry about money, all an act. I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become when you thought your father had nothing left to offer you. Tonight, I found out, I'm leaving you this house. The deed will be transferred to your name within the week. Consider it payment for 3 years of room and board, plus interest. Don't worry about the mortgage. There isn't one. I paid it off last year. As for the rest of what your mother and I built together, that situation has become more complicated. I'll be in touch through my lawyer in the coming weeks. I hope someday you'll understand that I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because I loved you enough to want you to be better than the man you showed me you are tonight. Your father, Alan. I read the letter 3 times, making small changes, adding details, removing others. It wasn't everything. I couldn't explain the full scope of my deception in a single letter, but it was enough to start the process, enough to make Patrick understand that he'd made a terrible miscalculation. The really devastating revelations would come later. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, writing Patrick's name on the front in my careful handwriting. Then I began packing. I didn't own much, or at least I didn't keep much here. Most of my possessions were in storage or at the small apartment I'd maintained across town. The one Patrick didn't know about. The apartment where I really lived, with my real furniture, my real clothes, my real life. It didn't take long to fill a single suitcase. A few changes of clothes, some personal items, the photograph of Patrick's mother that I kept on my nightstand. Everything else I could leave behind. It was mostly props anyway, part of the elaborate performance I'd been giving for 3 years. At 4 in the morning, I carried my suitcase quietly to the front door. The house was silent now. Patrick and Sarah were finally asleep, probably exhausted from their emotional victory over the old man. I placed the letter on the kitchen table where Patrick would see it when he came down for his morning coffee. Next to it, I left my house key and the spare car key to the old Ford. He could keep the car. I had others. As I walked away from the house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. The weight of the deception, the constant acting, the careful monitoring of every word and action. It was all lifting off my shoulders with each step. I had my phone in my pocket and I knew I should call a taxi, but the morning air was cool and fresh, and I needed the walk. I needed time to think about what came next. Behind me, The house where I'd spent 3 years pretending to be someone I wasn't grew smaller in the distance. Ahead of me lay the truth and the consequences of 3 years of careful observation. Patrick was about to learn that his father wasn't the helpless old man he'd thought he was, but more importantly, he was about to learn that actions have consequences, even when you think no one important is watching, especially then. I was sitting in my real apartment, drinking genuine Ethiopian coffee from my espresso machine, when my phone started ringing. The caller ID showed Patrick's number, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the fifth call, I was almost amused. The letter had clearly been found. My apartment was everything the room at Patrick's house wasn't. Spacious, well-furnished, filled with the books and artwork I'd collected over the years. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that cost me $1,200 a month, though I owned the building, so I was essentially paying rent to myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and finally answered the phone on the 8th call. "Dad?" Patrick's voice was strained, confused. "Where are you? I found your letter, but I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "You said you own this house? How is that possible? And what did you mean about having other money?" I could hear Sarah in the background, her voice sharp with questions I couldn't quite make out. Patrick shushed her, but she kept talking. "It's exactly what I said, Patrick. I own your house. I bought it 2 years ago when you were having trouble with the mortgage payments. Remember? You thought the bank had suddenly become more flexible with the terms." Silence on the other end of the line. "Dad, that's impossible. We never missed a payment." "You're right. You never missed a payment because I was making them." "Did you really think your construction business was doing well enough to support a 4-bedroom house in Maple Heights, 2 car payments, and Sarah's shopping habits?" I heard him intake sharply. In the background, Sarah's voice got louder. I caught the words, "what money," and "lying." "I don't believe you," Patrick said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Check with your mortgage company," I suggested. "Ask them who's been making the payments for the last 2 years. Ask them whose name is actually on the deed now." Another long silence. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why what? Why did I help you? Or why did I hide it from you?" "Both." I set down my coffee cup and walked to the window. 3 floors below, people were going about their Monday morning routines. Normal people living normal lives, not playing elaborate games with their families. "I helped you because you're my son," I said. "I hid it because I wanted to see what kind of man you were when you thought I had nothing to offer you." "That's crazy, Dad. That's really messed up." "Is it? More messed up than calling your father a burden? More messed up than threatening to put him in a nursing home because he doesn't contribute enough money?" Patrick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more like the boy I remembered. "How much money do you have?" "Enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to live comfortably, enough to help my family when they need it. Enough to know the difference between people who love me and people who use me." I could hear Sarah grabbing the phone. "Alan, this is ridiculous." Her voice came through clearly now. "If you had money all along, why were you living like that?" "Like what, Sarah?" "Like a charity case, like someone we had to take care of. Because I wanted to see if you would take care of me even when you thought I was a charity case. Apparently that was asking too much. You lied to us. I lived modestly. There's a difference. You let us think you were poor. I never said I was poor. I never asked you for money. I never claimed I couldn't afford things. You all just assumed." I heard Patrick take the phone back. "Dad, I don't know how to process this. Take your time. But while you're processing, you might want to start thinking about what you're going to do now." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I won't be subsidizing your lifestyle anymore. The house payments, the insurance, the property taxes, that all stops now. You wanted me to stop being a burden, remember? Consider yourself unburdened." The panic in his voice was immediate. "Wait, we can't afford." "That's not my problem anymore, Patrick. Dad, please, let's talk about this." "Come back and we'll figure it out." "Figure what out? How to apologize for treating me like garbage? How to pretend you actually care about me as a person?" "We do care about you." "Funny way of showing it." I heard Sarah in the background again, her voice urgent now. She was probably doing quick math in her head, figuring out how much their monthly expenses would increase without my secret support. "The house payments alone are $1,800 a month," Patrick said. The insurance is another $300. Dad, we really can't. You should have thought about that before you decided I was worthless. I never said you were worthless. You said I was a burden. You said I wasn't contributing. You suggested I move to assisted living. What exactly would you call that? Another long silence. I could almost hear him thinking, trying to find a way to undo the damage from yesterday's conversation. We were frustrated, he said finally. Sarah's been under a lot of stress with her job, and money's been tight, and we just took it out on me. We didn't mean it. Yes, you did. That's the thing about anger, Patrick. It makes people tell the truth. Yesterday you told me the truth about how you really feel about your father. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I've been supporting your family for 2 years while you treated me like a freeloader? Is it fair that I've been living in a closet-sized room, eating whatever scraps were left after you and Sarah finished dinner, listening to you complain about my existence? We never made you eat scraps. No, you just made it clear that I was an inconvenience at your dinner table. Sarah would make exactly enough food for 2 people, then act surprised when there wasn't enough for 3. You'd buy groceries for your specific meals, never accounting for the fact that I might get hungry too. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. These weren't things he could deny because they were all true. I didn't realize, he started. You didn't want to realize. It was easier to see me as the burden Sarah kept telling you I was. She never said you were a burden. Patrick, I have ears. I heard the conversations. I heard her complaining about the electric bill going up because I watched TV during the day. I heard her telling her friends that she had to cook for 3 people now. I heard her suggesting that I eat more meals in my room so you 2 could have family time. More silence. Look, I said, I'm not calling to punish you. I'm calling because you deserve to know the truth. All of it. All of it? The house is just the beginning, Patrick. Your mother and I were very careful with money, very smart about investing, very lucky with some of our choices. How much are we talking about? We'll get to that. But first, you need to decide something. Decide what? Decide whether you want a relationship with your father or whether you want a relationship with your father's money. Because as of right now, you can't have both. I could hear Sarah grabbing for the phone again, but Patrick held on to it. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done pretending to be poor, and I'm done pretending that yesterday didn't happen. If you want me in your life, it's going to be because you want Alan Morrison. Not because you want what Alan Morrison can give you. Dad, of course we want you. Your family. Am I? Because yesterday, family wasn't enough to earn me basic respect in your home. I heard him sigh deeply. What do you want from us? I want you to think about that question, Patrick. Really think about it. I want you to consider why your first instinct is to ask what I want from you, instead of asking what you can do to make this right. Okay. Then what can we do to make this right? That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. When you do, you know my number. I hung up before he could respond. Outside my window, the city continued its Monday morning routine. But inside my apartment, everything had changed. The game was over, the mask was off, and for the first time in 3 years, I was free to be myself. Now I had to decide who that person was going to be. 2 weeks passed before Patrick called again. 2 weeks during which I settled back into my real life, reconnected with friends he didn't know I had, and watched from a distance as my son learned what it meant to actually pay his own bills. My building superintendent, Carlos, had been keeping me updated. Carlos was a good man who'd worked for me for 5 years, maintaining not just my apartment building but several other properties I owned around the city. He was also Patrick's neighbor's cousin, which meant news traveled fast. Your boy's been making calls, Carlos told me over coffee on a Tuesday morning, trying to refinance the house, looking for a second mortgage. Word is his wife's been pushing him to sell and downsize. I wasn't surprised. Sarah had always been practical, if nothing else. When the money dried up, she'd cut losses quickly. He's also been asking around about you, Carlos continued. Talking to neighbors, trying to figure out how you could afford to buy his house. Mrs. Henderson told him she always wondered why a man with such nice shoes claimed to be broke. I smiled at that. Mrs. Henderson was sharp. I'd forgotten that she'd noticed my shoes. What kind of questions is he asking? The wrong kind, Carlos said. He's not asking where you are or how you're doing. He's asking how much money you have and whether you're really his father's owner of other properties. That stung, but didn't surprise me. Patrick was still thinking like Sarah's husband instead of Alan Morrison's son. When he finally called, I was in my study, going through financial documents with Marcus Webb. My lawyer had been helping me restructure some investments, and we'd been discussing the changes I wanted to make to my will. Alan Morrison speaking. I answered formally, as if I didn't recognize the number. Dad, it's me. Hello, Patrick. Can we talk? I mean, really talk? I glanced at Marcus, who nodded, and began gathering his papers. What would you like to talk about? I've been doing some thinking. Some research, too. I know about the apartment building now, and the storage unit. Mrs. Henderson saw you driving a different car last week. And I need to understand what's happening here. How long have you been living this double life, as if taking care of my family while living modestly was some kind of deception? I've been living simply by choice for about 15 years, I said. Your mother and I made that decision together after some investments paid off better than we expected. What investments? Various things. Real estate mostly, some stocks. Your mother's family farm sold for considerably more than anyone expected when the county needed the land for highway expansion. I could hear him breathing on the other end, processing this information. How much money are we talking about, Dad? There it was again. The focus on numbers instead of relationship. Why does the amount matter, Patrick? Because I need to know how to process this. I need to know if you're comfortable, or if you're wealthy, or if you're rich? Yes. I walked to my window, looking out at the city I'd called home for 30 years. Define rich. I don't know. Millions? I was quiet for a long moment. Marcus had finished packing and was waiting by the door. I waved him out and settled into my favorite chair. Patrick, do you know what your mother said to me the day before she died? What? She said, make sure Patrick learns to love people, not things. Make sure he knows the difference between being loved and being needed. Dad, that doesn't answer my question. It answers the only question that matters. Which is whether you're calling because you miss your father, or because you've figured out your father has money. Silence. That's not fair, he said finally. Isn't it? You've called me twice in 2 weeks. The first time was to ask how much money I have. This time you started by telling me about your research into my financial situation. You haven't once asked how I'm doing, where I'm living, or whether I'm happy. How are you doing? Too late, son. I heard him sigh. Dad, I'm trying here. Are you? Because it sounds like you're trying to figure out how to get back into my good graces so you can get back into my wallet. That's not... Okay, maybe it started that way. But Sarah's been doing math, and we really are in trouble without your help. Your trouble, not mine. You're really going to let us lose the house? I'm not letting you do anything. You're adults who made adult decisions. You decided I was a burden. You decided I should go to assisted living. You decided my contributions weren't enough. Now you get to live with those decisions. We were wrong. Yes, you were. Doesn't that count for something? I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how to answer that question. Did it count for something? The fact that he could admit he was wrong? It counts for something, I said finally. But not everything. What would count for everything? Time, Patrick. Time and actions, not words. What kind of actions? That's not for me to tell you. That's for you to figure out. I could hear Sarah in the background again. Her voice was more urgent now, more desperate. 2 weeks of real bills had apparently been educational. She wants to talk to you, Patrick said. I'm sure she does. Will you talk to her? No. Why not? Because Sarah never wanted a relationship with me, Patrick. She wanted a babysitter for her conscience. As long as you were taking care of your poor old father, she could feel good about what a generous, family-oriented woman she'd married. But the moment that became inconvenient, I became disposable. That's not true, isn't it? How many times did Sarah ask about my day, Patrick? How many times did she ask about my health, my interests, my feelings? How many conversations did we have that weren't about household logistics? He was quiet. I'll answer for you. None. Because Sarah never saw me as a person. She saw me as a responsibility that came with marrying you. And when that responsibility became too expensive for her taste, she convinced you to get rid of it. She's not a bad person, Dad. I didn't say she was bad. I said she was selfish. There's a difference. So what now? We just don't have a relationship anymore? We have whatever relationship you're willing to build from scratch, but it can't be based on money, and it can't be based on guilt, and it can't be based on what you think I owe you, or what you think you can get from me. Then what can it be based on? Love, Patrick. The kind of love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. The kind of love that would care about an old man, even if he really was living on just a pension. I do love you, do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The idea of a father who's secretly wealthy enough to solve all your problems? Another long silence. I don't know anymore, he said. And for the first time in our conversation, he sounded honest. That's the first truthful thing you've said to me in years. So where does that leave us? It leaves you with some thinking to do, some real thinking about what you want from life and what kind of man you want to be. And what about you? What are you going to do? I looked around my study, at the life I'd built and hidden for so many years. I'm going to live my real life for the first time in 15 years. I'm going to stop pretending to be poor, stop pretending to need charity, stop pretending that family loyalty can be one-sided. Does that mean you're cutting us off completely? It means I'm cutting off the lie. If there's going to be a relationship between us, it's going to be an honest one. I want that, he said quickly. I want an honest relationship. Do you? Even if honesty means admitting that you failed the test I've been giving you for 3 years? Even if honesty means acknowledging that you were willing to abandon your father when you thought he was a burden? Yes. Even if honesty means accepting that things between us may never be the same? A longer pause. Yes. We'll see, Patrick. We'll see. Can I see you? Can we meet somewhere and talk face to face? Not yet. When? When you can answer one question. What question? If I really was just a factory worker living on a small pension, if I really didn't have any money or property or investments, would you still want a relationship with me? Of course. Think about it longer than that, son. Really think about it. Because your answer to that question is going to determine everything that happens between us from now on. I hung up before he could respond, but this time I didn't feel satisfied. I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my son had to think about whether he'd love his poor father. Sad that 3 years of testing had revealed truths I'd hoped never to discover. Outside my window, the city moved on, indifferent to one old man's disappointment in his child. But inside my apartment, I was finally free to grieve, not just for the son I thought I had, but for the father I'd tried so hard to be. 3 months had passed since my last conversation with Patrick. 3 months during which I'd received exactly 17 phone calls from him, 43 text messages, and 1 handwritten letter delivered to my building's front desk. I'd responded to none of them. During those 3 months, I'd also received updates from Carlos about the situation at Patrick's house. The foreclosure notice had been posted 6 weeks ago. Sarah had moved back in with her parents. Patrick was living alone in a house he could no longer afford, working overtime to try to make payments he couldn't manage without my secret support. It was Marcus who finally convinced me to make contact. "Alan, the boy's suffering," he said during one of our weekly lunch meetings. Maybe he needed to suffer a little to understand what he'd lost, but this is getting cruel. Cruel? I set down my sandwich and looked at my lawyer. What was cruel was telling your father he should go to a nursing home because he wasn't contributing enough money. That was 3 months ago. People can change. Can they? Or do they just get desperate enough to say what they think you want to hear? Marcus adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. There's one way to find out. Which is, tell him everything, all of it. Let him see the full scope of what he threw away, and then see how he reacts. I'd been thinking the same thing for weeks. The partial revelations had been testing the waters, seeing if Patrick could handle small truths before I hit him with the big ones, but maybe it was time to rip the bandage off completely. The foundation money? I asked. All of it. The Morrison Industries sale? All of it. The real estate portfolio? Every property. Every investment, every decision you and Eleanor made over 30 years of marriage. I looked out the restaurant window at the busy street below. Somewhere across town, my son was probably working another double shift, trying to save a house he didn't know I still owned, fighting to preserve a life built on my secret support. He's going to hate me, I said. He might, but he might also finally understand what he lost. That evening, I called Patrick. "Dad?" He answered on the first ring, his voice breathless with hope and desperation. "Hello, Patrick. Are you free tomorrow evening?" Yes, absolutely. Do you want to meet somewhere?" "Come to my apartment. I'll send you the address." "Your apartment?" "My real apartment." There was a pause. "How long have you had a real apartment?" 15 years. Another pause. "Jesus, Dad. Tomorrow at 7. Come alone." "Sarah's not. We're not together anymore." That surprised me, though maybe it shouldn't have. Sarah had always been practical about money. When mine dried up, Her interest in my son probably did too. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Yes, Patrick. Despite everything, I never wanted your marriage to fail. It didn't fail because of you. It failed because of me, because of who I became. That was the most self-aware thing I'd heard him say in years. We'll talk tomorrow, I said, and hung up. The next evening, I prepared my apartment carefully. I put away some of the more obviously expensive items, the artwork that was worth more than Patrick's annual salary, the first edition books, the crystal collection Eleanor had loved. I wanted him to see the truth, but I didn't want to overwhelm him immediately. When the doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, I took a deep breath before opening it. Patrick looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. But he was clean, and he was on time, and he looked me in the eye when I opened the door. Dad. Patrick, come in. He stepped into my apartment and stopped dead. Even with the most expensive pieces hidden, it was clearly the home of someone with means. The furniture was quality, the space was large, the view was spectacular. How long? He asked. Have a seat first. He moved to the sofa like a man in a trance, taking in details. The hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves, the kitchen with appliances that cost more than most people's cars. How long have you been living like this while I thought you were barely scraping by? I sat across from him in my favorite chair. 15 years, since 2 years after your mother died. Why? Because your mother and I made a decision before she passed. We decided that if we were blessed with financial success, we wanted to make sure you learned the value of work, the importance of character, and the difference between being loved for who you are versus what you have. Patrick stared at me. So this was all a test? In the beginning, yes. Later it became something else. What? A revelation. About you, about me, about our family. I got up and walked to my desk, pulling out a thick folder I'd prepared. Your mother and I were smart about money, Patrick. Smarter than you know. I handed him the folder. This is everything. All of it. His hands shook as he opened it. The first document was a portfolio summary from my investment firm. His eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. Dad, this says you have. Keep reading. The next document was a list of my real estate holdings. 7 apartment buildings in the city, 3 office complexes, 2 retail centers, and the small house where I'd grown up, which I'd bought back from the family who purchased it from my parents. You own all of this? Your mother and I built it together. Every decision, every investment, every risk we took was so that you could have choices in life. He flipped to the next page and found the documentation for Morrison Industries, the small manufacturing company my father had started, and I'd sold 12 years ago for $14.8 million. Patrick's face went white. You owned a company? I inherited it from your grandfather. Your mother and I ran it together for 22 years. We sold it when we decided to semi-retire. Semi-retire to what? To managing our investments and watching you build your life. He continued reading, his face growing paler with each page. Bank statements showing balances that made his construction business look like a lemonade stand. Investment accounts that generated more income each month than he made in a year. Insurance policies that would set up his children's children for life. The total net worth, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This can't be right. $28.3 million as of last month. Patrick dropped the folder. Papers scattered across my coffee table, each one representing years of careful planning and sacrifice that he'd never known about. You're a millionaire. I'm a multimillionaire, Patrick. And until 3 months ago, every penny of it was going to be yours. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled, pressing back into the sofa cushions. Until 3 months ago? I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out another document. My will, freshly updated. I changed my will the day after you told me I should go to a nursing home. His hands shook as he took the document. I watched his face as he read the new distribution of assets. 90% to various charities, 5% to Marcus Webb for handling the estate, 5% to Patrick, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to live carelessly. You're giving it all away. I'm giving it to people who will appreciate it. Because of what I said. Because of who you showed me you are. Patrick set the will down carefully, as if it might explode. Dad, I know I messed up. I know what I said was wrong. But this seems extreme. Does it? Let me ask you something, Patrick. If you had known about this money 3 months ago, would you have still suggested I move to assisted living? Of course not. Why not? Because. He trailed off, and I could see him beginning to understand the trap he'd walked into. Because I wouldn't have been a burden anymore. I would have been an asset. He nodded miserably. So your love for me, your willingness to take care of me, was directly tied to what I could do for you financially. That's not. I mean, it's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. Poor father equals burden. Rich father equals welcome family member. Patrick buried his face in his hands. God, Dad, what kind of person have I become? The kind of person your mother was afraid you'd become. The kind of person we tried to prevent by living simply and teaching you the value of things that can't be bought. I failed the test. You failed more than a test, Patrick. You failed your father. We sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the city lights were beginning to twinkle as evening settled in. Inside my apartment, my son was confronting the full scope of his mistake. The house, he said finally. You said you owned it. I do. I bought it when you started having trouble with payments. I've been covering your mortgage, your insurance, your property taxes for 2 years. And now? Now you're 3 months behind and the bank is foreclosing. But you could stop it. I could. Will you? I looked at my son. This man I'd raised and loved and tested and been disappointed by. That depends. On what? On whether you can answer the question I asked you 3 months ago. About loving you if you were really poor? Yes. Patrick was quiet for a long time, staring at the scattered papers that represented a fortune he'd just learned he'd lost. I don't know, he said finally. I want to say yes, but sitting here, looking at all this, knowing what I threw away, I don't know if I'm a good enough person to love someone just for who they are. It was the most honest answer he'd ever given me. That's the first step, I said. The first step to what? To becoming the man your mother and I hoped you could be. Patrick looked up at me, tears in his eyes. Is it too late? I thought about Eleanor, about the conversation we'd had in her hospital bed about making sure Patrick learned to love people, not things. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the careful planning, the hopes we'd had for our son. I don't know, I said, but we're about to find out. 1 year later, I was sitting in the same chair in my apartment, reading the morning newspaper, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. Hello, Patrick. Hi, Dad. How are you? It was a simple question, but it represented something that had taken my son nearly 12 months to learn how to ask properly. Not, what do you need? Or, can I help with something? Just a genuine inquiry about my well-being. I'm doing well, I said. How about you? Good, really good, actually. I wanted to call and let you know I got the promotion. 6 months ago, after losing his house and his business, Patrick had taken a job with a large construction firm. He'd started as a regular crew member, despite his years of experience running his own company. It had been humbling, but it had also been exactly what he needed. Congratulations. Site supervisor? Assistant project manager. It's not much, but it's a step up. In the old days, Patrick would have followed that statement with a request for money to help him get back on his feet faster, or a suggestion that I could help him start another business. Now he simply shared his good news and left it at that. I'm proud of you, I said, and meant it. Thanks. That means a lot. There was a comfortable pause. Our conversations had become easier over the past few months, less loaded with the weight of unspoken expectations. Dad, I wanted to ask you something. Here it comes, I thought. The request for help, the plea to reconsider the will, the appeal to family loyalty. I'd been waiting for it. What's that? Would you like to have dinner this weekend? Nothing fancy, just. I'd like to cook for you. That surprised me. Cook for me? I've been learning. Turns out I'm not terrible at it. I thought maybe you could come to my apartment, and I could make that pot roast you used to love when Mom was alive. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Eleanor's pot roast had been Patrick's favorite meal as a child. The fact that he remembered it was mine too, and that he'd learned to make it himself, said more about his growth than any apology could have. I'd like that, I said. Saturday at 6, I'll be there. After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about the journey we'd both taken over the past year. It hadn't been easy. There had been anger, resentment, and more than a few conversations that ended with one of us hanging up on the other. But slowly, painfully, we'd begun to rebuild something real. The turning point had come about 4 months ago. Patrick had been living in a small apartment, working his new job, struggling to make ends meet but refusing to ask me for help. I'd been watching from a distance, waiting to see what kind of man he'd become when stripped of all the advantages my money had secretly provided. He'd called me one evening, not to ask for anything, but to tell me that he'd been thinking about Eleanor, about the kind of person she'd been, and the values she'd tried to instill in him. "I think I understand now," he'd said. "What you and Mom were trying to teach me. It wasn't about the money. It was about who I am when no one's watching, when there's nothing to gain." "And who are you?" I'd asked. "I'm working on figuring that out." That honesty, that admission that he was still learning, had been the first crack in the wall between us. Saturday evening, I drove to Patrick's apartment building. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it was clean and safe, and he'd chosen it because he could afford it on his own. I was proud of him for that, for choosing independence over asking his wealthy father for help. His apartment was small but well maintained. He'd furnished it simply, mostly with pieces from thrift stores and estate sales. The dining table was set for two with mismatched plates and silverware, but there were fresh flowers in a mason jar and cloth napkins that looked like they'd been ironed. "Smells good in here," I said as he took my coat. "I hope it tastes as good as it smells. I've been practicing for weeks." We sat down to dinner, and it was good. Not quite as good as Eleanor's had been, but close enough to bring back memories of Sunday dinners when Patrick was young, when our family had been whole and happy and uncomplicated by money and expectations. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately," Patrick said as we ate. "What about her? About how she never cared about having nice things. Remember how she'd get more excited about finding a good book at a garage sale than she did about the jewelry you bought her for anniversaries?" I smiled. She said experiences and knowledge were the only things worth collecting. I used to think that was just something poor people said to make themselves feel better about not having money. And now? Now, I think she was smarter than both of us. We finished dinner and moved to his small living room. Patrick had made coffee, real coffee, not the instant kind he'd been drinking when money was tightest. "Dad, I need to say something," he said as we settled into his second-hand armchairs. "All right, I know you changed your will. I know most of your money is going to charity now." I nodded, but didn't speak. "I want you to know that I think that's the right decision." That surprised me. "Do you?" "Yes. A year ago, I would have said it was crazy, that family should come first, that I was your son and I deserved that inheritance. But I've been thinking about what I would have done with $28 million a year ago. What would you have done? Probably would have quit working, bought a bigger house, fancier cars, taken expensive vacations. I would have turned into one of those rich guys who thinks money makes them better than everyone else. And now? Now I know that the best thing you ever did for me was make me learn to work for what I have. Make me learn what I'm actually worth as a person, not as your heir." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee and listening to the sounds of the city outside his windows. "There is one thing I want to ask you," Patrick said finally. "What's that?" "Not for money, just, would you consider leaving me something that belonged to Mom? Maybe her wedding ring or one of her books. Something I could pass down to my kids someday, if I'm lucky enough to have any." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "You mean like this?" Patrick's eyes widened as he recognized it. Inside was Eleanor's engagement ring, the simple solitaire I'd given her 40 years ago when we were both young and poor and madly in love. "I was going to give this to you when you got engaged to Sarah," I said. "But you chose that big diamond instead, and I realized you weren't ready for what this ring represents." "What does it represent?" "A love that doesn't depend on circumstances, a commitment that survives hardship, the willingness to build something together, even when you don't have much to build with." Patrick took the box with shaking hands. "Dad, I can't. This is too much." "No, it's exactly enough. Your mother would want you to have it when you're ready to find someone who deserves it." "How do I know when I'm ready?" "You'll know. Because you'll love her the same way whether she has everything or nothing. The same way you've learned to love your father." Patrick looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I do love you, Dad. Not your money, not what you can do for me, just you. I know you do, son. It took you a while to get there, but I know you do. Are we going to be okay? Our relationship, I mean." I looked around his modest apartment. at the son who'd learned to make his own way in the world, who'd discovered his own worth through struggle and disappointment. He wasn't the same man who'd told me to go to a nursing home a year ago. He wasn't even the same man who'd asked for my help 6 months ago. He was the man Eleanor and I had hoped he could become. "We're going to be fine," I said. "Better than fine." As I drove home that night, I thought about the choices we'd made, Eleanor and I, all those years ago. The decision to live simply despite our wealth. The decision to test our son's character. The decision to prioritize values over comfort. It had been painful. It had nearly cost me my relationship with Patrick entirely. But sitting in his small apartment, eating his carefully prepared dinner, seeing the man he'd become when stripped of entitlement and forced to find his own way, I knew we'd made the right choice. My phone buzzed with a text message as I pulled into my building's parking garage. "Thank you for dinner, Dad. And for everything else. Love you." I smiled and typed back, "Love you too, son. See you next weekend." Because there would be a next weekend, and many more after that. We'd found our way back to each other, not through money or obligation, but through the simple recognition that some relationships are worth fighting for, worth rebuilding from the ground up. I was 60 years old, and for the first time in years, I was truly proud to be Patrick Morrison's father. And more importantly, he was truly worthy of being Eleanor Morrison's son. The money would go to charity, as planned, but the things that really mattered, the things that couldn't be bought or sold or inherited, those we'd managed to preserve, those were worth more than $28 million. Those were worth everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until here.